Hi, welcome to Art on the Brain. I'm Kelly Drake, and I recently spent some time on the island of Maui doing a little painting and sketching in my art journal. So today, this is a beach near Kuleana, which is between Kapalua and Lahaina, and just wanted to take some time to do some sketching here. Okay, so I'm doing this on a split screen so that you can see the view that I'm looking at as it's moving, and so that you can kind of experience what I'm doing here. You can also, if you want to, get a sketchbook and do the same thing as you're looking at this beach scene if you wish, and practice along with me. One of the main reasons that I like to do little plein air sketches like this is just for the practice. I think it's really good at teaching you how to see things and how to translate them to your paper. It's also a really good exercise in mixing paint and trying to capture the colors that are in front of you, the natural colors. It requires a lot of mixing, and it's just a nice thing to do. It also, what I notice is, as opposed to taking a photograph of what I'm looking at, if I paint it, I actually remember a lot more. I remember the sounds, I remember what's around me, what's going on around me, and I remember the feeling of being there a lot more than if I took a picture. You spend a lot more time sitting there and studying the scene and really feeling and thinking about what's around you. And so there's more going on here as a jog to your memory when you look at it later. So I think it's great to keep a travel log. And not that I always do it, but when I do, I'm always happy that I did. So I just started out here on, this is a watercolor journal, watercolor paper. I really like these art journals that have watercolor paper in them. And this is a Strathmore visual journal with a 140-pound cold press. It really holds up. You don't have to worry about the paper buckling a lot. And so these are really nice journals to take on a trip with you. I started out with watercolor pencil and just did a really light sketch in blue so that I could kind of see what was going on there, just the general, very general shapes. And then just took out my travel watercolor case, which is filled with some of my favorite colors from Daniel Smith that I use normally, and brought those with me. I also brought my watercolor brushes that I usually use in a case, and I think that's the best way to go. Rather than have something totally different that you use for travel, use the things that you use all the time and become very familiar with them, so that you can translate this later into more of a finished painting, or just using it as practice for the materials that you normally use. So I kind of, when I'm outside, I like to go back and forth between the watercolor pencil and the watercolors, mainly because it takes some time for things to dry. Even here where it's a hot day, it's still a little humid, still takes things a little time to dry because I'm sitting in the shade. One day I did do a sketch out in the sunlight with no shade, and it was so hot, everything was drying very quickly, and it was actually much more difficult to capture that scene. So this one, I'm in the shade. I'm going back and forth between my paints and my watercolor pencils. And the watercolor pencils are so nice because you can blend them in, you can use them as watercolor paint. You can do a lot of things with them that a regular pencil you can't do. And I like the colors that come with the watercolor pencils. A lot of times they will hold their color a little better when the other watercolor is kind of fading. So here over the sand, I decided to warm it up and put a yellow ochre wash over everything. I thought that would kind of warm up the sand. Everything was turning out very cool and pale, so just trying to add some contrast and add some warmth to it. And I already used that yellow ochre to build my neutrals, my warm neutrals on the sand, and some of my cooler neutrals I'm going to use on that rock wall in the background there. So I put a little yellow ochre in everything just so that everything kind of goes together. And the only thing I didn't use it in, I may have used a little bit in the water, just to make that green, just a tiny bit of it, just to make sure everything kind of blended. I like to do that if I have a dominant color, even if there's more of it in some areas, less of it in others. If you just use a little bit of it in everything, or almost everything, everything's going to hold together a lot better. So I used a lot of cerulean blue here and a lot of yellow ochre, just kind of mixed together. With the neutrals for the sand, I use yellow ochre, cerulean blue, a little bit of burnt umber, and ultramarine. Now, burnt umber and ultramarine is kind of my go-to for a neutral. You can make a warm neutral out of that and a cool neutral. If you haven't seen my video on how to paint clouds, I did this in the studio from a photograph. Take a look at that. It really talks a lot about mixing neutrals, and it goes much more in depth about that, and that's something that you can really use when you're outside painting, mixing more natural colors and neutrals from what you have on your palette. And so here I'm just trying to get a little bit more contrast, some of the darks, and there's a little darker area down there by where the water is hitting the sand and going over the sand. Really, it could use a little bit more blue down there where it's reflecting the sky. Not sure if I got that in this painting, but there's always things that you see later on that you can add too. This is just a very quick sketch. It's done in the amount of time that you have, sitting there on the beach. I had only so much time waiting for my family as they were playing around in the water. And so I do what I can with the amount of time that I have. And then always knowing that later on I can look at it and I can change little things here and there. Or I can build on it if I decide to do a more finished painting later. Down on the water's edge there, I hadn't left a lot of white to show that little bit of surf coming in. And so I just used a little bit of the green that I had mixed for the water, which is basically cerulean, ultramarine, and a little bit of that yellow ochre. And I just used, even though it's pale, I just used a tiny bit of it to darken around where the surf was coming in. So that's my sketch of the beach in Hawaii. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this helps you with your plein air studies. And now don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this, and stop by and check out my webpage, my Facebook page, or take a look at my Instagram account if you'd like to learn more about me, my art, and my children's book illustrations.